Alright, good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Magic House in Mexico, working on oil painting digital allegory. Alright, picking up from where I left off yesterday, today I'm just going to do some general shadows and highlights. I've got some bright yellow-orange mixed up to sort of accent and do the interior. Some deep alizarin crimson to drape in some shadows from the T-Rex and the figure. And also some bright light green after the shadows are draped in to go back and start highlighting and making the green grass a bit brighter. And after that, if there's enough time, I might zoom in and start working on the T-Rex. We'll see.
Tomorrow, but again, stress in the first 3 years of life interferes with the development of the child's brain also. Now, any child born into a family where there's drinking in the family is born into a stress situation, by definition. How do we know what is the effect of stress on the developing brain and what is the effect of alcohol? Well, in the case of the kids who've got the facial markings, or the brain scan findings, or the heart difficulty, the heart abnormalities, and so on, caused by the toxin, alcohol, well, you can clearly say that's the alcohol. But what about the many kids with the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder who don't have any of the physical markings at all? Can we say for sure that it's all because of the alcohol? There's a lot of it perhaps due to the stress on the parenting environment. Now here's the good news though. The good news is the part that's due to the stress is actually reversible. Those brain circuits can be rewired in the child. There's something called neuroplasticity, which is the capacity of the brain to develop new circuits even later on in life. And that capacity is with us all our lives, and we know this from animal studies and human experience, that the brain can rewire. We can see this on brain scans. We can see it on autopsies. So if you give people the right conditions, in fact, you know something? Even those infants who are born with physical brain damage can develop new circuits later on in life. Studies in California have shown this. You take rats and you deliberately brain damage them at birth, but then you expose them to an environment that's supportive and nourishing, they'll actually do a whole lot better. You can take mice where you've knocked out one of their genes that's supposed to supports learning, but if you give them the right environment, you'll never know that that gene wasn't active in them. They learn just as well as other mice. In other words, there's much more capacity for repair and new development and new functions to arise in the human brain than we actually often credit. But what does that depend on? Well, just like the plant, it depends on the environment. So the key question is, how do we give kids the right kind of environment? And never mind giving up on anybody. Because you never know how much development they're capable of until you give them a right environment. Now the right environment, of course, involves a lot of loving and nurturing. It does not involve fancy techniques, necessarily. It does not involve a whole lot of technology. It involves lots of unconditional, loving attention. And that's what this dog did for this kid. And the point that they make in this article, and this dog is the only creature in that boy's life who does not react negatively when the kid acts out. In fact, he's trained to get in there, and even he can pick up when the kid is going to act out. He senses it. He gets in there and tries to cheer the kid up, and you know, it's amazing. And as the article points out, that when the human brain can relax, then it can learn. So that for learning, you have to have a sense of comfort and safety. And when you got your emotional needs met, and you're loved and you're accepted, then your brain can relax and it can actually take on the task of learning, acquiring new information, and incorporating that new information. So even this heavily, heavily challenged little boy was severely physically affected by the alcohol. Even in him, the presence of the dog has meant a completely new lease on life. And he'll always be challenged. But there's capacities in him that nobody would ever known that he had if this dog had been brought into his life, especially trained dog. But what the dog can provide is, of course, what ideally human beings could also provide if we weren't screwed up, all of us, which is this unconditional loving acceptance and the sense of intuitive connection. So that's what these kids need. That's also what the women need who drink. Because again, their drinking is no accident. And that caused me, finally, to look at the larger picture again. And that larger picture again is Canadian society. Now, a few years ago, our current Prime Minister apologized for the residential schools. You know, I think I've heard everything in the downtown east side and doing my travels, but then something happens and I think, this is impossible. So let me tell you a little story. So last year, about a year ago, I was working with one of the native bands in BC, the Seashell Band, and I was working with a Peruvian plant called ayahuasca, which is a healing plant, one of these healing plants. It's hallucinogen. Ooh, it gives you visions. Healing visions. And we had a Peruvian shaman working with us, and I was working with supporting that work. And of course, we were dealing with people who are addicted, women who are heavily into cocaine, men who are into alcohol, or both, or women, you know, and just heavily addicted group of people. And I initiated this discussion about, look, well, let's just go what happened to you in life. So one woman in her 50s told me that in a residential school, when she was 4 years old, and somebody would have heard these stories, but to me it was a shock. I thought I'd heard everything, I hadn't. When she spoke her native language, you know what they did? The nuns stuck a pin in her tongue to give her pain, so as to make her forget her language. Now, of course, that means she had to sit there the whole hour. That's it. Because if she put her tongue back in her mouth, she would cut her lips or the inside of her mouth. This happened in this province, in this country, within the lifetime of many people in this room. And then we talk about drunken Indians. Then we say, why are they doing this to their kids? You know? So when this apology came from Mr. Harper, well, that was a good thing. At least they acknowledged what happened. But it's not enough. In fact, I rather thought that the apology was meaningless. The reason it was meaningless is because it's not enough to apologize for something if you're going to keep doing the same thing. Now, it's not that we have residential schools in this country anymore. No, that we don't. So we can safely apologize for that. What we haven't apologized for yet is the destruction of people's ways of life. The destruction of the attempted, not successful, thank God, but the attempted destruction of their culture and the robbery of their resources. And why we haven't apologized for that? Because we're still doing it. Look right now, this northern pipeline that they want to build. The native communities across the north are lining up to oppose it, to express their concerns for their children, for the possible toxic effect, for the further destruction of their ways of life. And our government says that these people who are saying those things are just foreign agitators. But what does it mean to apologize when you're still going to rob people of what belongs to them? And when you continue to make their lives miserable? Then what do we expect except more addiction? And what's our government's response to that? To the addiction problem, to the fact that people are going to drink and break the law, to spend billions of dollars more in jails. So the same government that doesn't have the money for social services and wants to raise the rage for old age pensions because, you know, to save money. What we do have money for is to build more jails and to keep people in jail longer by toughening up the criminal code. And who's going to end up in those jails? Let me read you a paragraph from my book on addiction. Detective Sergeant Paul Gillespie, head of Toronto's sex crimes unit, rescued children from the purveyors of internet pornography. That's what he did. He rescued these kids that were being abused on the internet. As the Globe and Mail reported on his retirement from police work, 6 years at that job had not inured him to the horrors that he witnessed. Paul Gillespie still can't get used to the sounds of crying in pain, says the Globe article, and the graphic videos of children being raped and molested that he has seen all too often on the web. It's beyond horrible to listen to the soundtracks of these movies, said Canada's best-known child porn cop. But it is the silent images of desolate children that tear most at his heart. They're not screaming, just accepting, he said, of the infants captured in his pictures. They have dead eyes. You can tell that their spirit is broken. That's their life. He's talking about 2-year-olds. Those 2-year-olds are going to end up drinking and using drugs. And if that same policeman, think about this one, if that same policeman, instead of quitting the force, transferred to the drug squad, who do you think he'd be chasing in the streets? Those children that he didn't rescue. Because they're the ones who become the addicts. They're the ones who become the alcoholics. So here we have the paradox of we try to protect and rescue kids from trauma if we can. And if we can't, we put them in jail 20 years later. And this is what we call a civilized country. This is what we call the best country in the world to live in. For who? Not for the vulnerable. Not for the people that suffer the multi-generational trauma of what this history, our history, is imposed on them. Well, there's good news in all this. The good news is that children brains.
Alright, so we got a few minutes. I'm going to mix up some Velo Blue glaze and start the glow that I want to be emanating from the television set.
Will take place. And a lot more kids can do a whole lot better if we get all that. We don't just dismiss them as this diagnosis and that diagnosis and that needs to focus. Because none of these conditions are written in stone, and even as much about FASD that's reversible. I'm not dismissing here the toxic effect of alcohol. I'm just saying there's a lot there besides that, and that's what Natalie said in the first place. There's a lot of continuity between these conditions, a lot of similarity. And so that the approach has to be also similar, which is to recognize that underlying all of them, including fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, there's a lot of childhood stress and trauma, multi-generational. And if we go to work on supporting these families and helping these families, and helping these children, and in our schools and kindergartens and institutions, and especially if we ever had the wisdom to stop spending the money in the utterly inhumane and non-productive and from every angle useless, worse than useless, criminalization of people who use substances because they're too much in pain, where we could actually get somewhere. And finally, when I look at the qualities or the teachings of traditional cultures around the world, whether in Peru or in North America or Canada or North Sea, what do we find? We see a recognition of the interconnection. We see the importance of connection to the land, of being grounded. We see the importance of nature. We see forgiveness. We see witnessing of one another's pain. We see listening. We see inclusion. We see restorative justice. We see ceremony. We see communal chanting and the creation of communal spaces. In other words, all the qualities necessary for healing are actually present in traditional teachings. So I think that for us to help heal the ones who most need it, but also for us to heal as a society, we need to drop the arrogance that science somehow will give us the answers. That realize that the answers have been here with us all along. We just haven't paid attention to them. And if we did, our whole society would be much more happy and much more humane. Thank you. If I could live my life over again, I'd live it very differently. You know, if I could parent them again, I might not be the same person. Because although I didn't have an alcohol or any substance addiction, I was a workaholic. And I wasn't around for my kids emotionally. And you don't have to have alcohol or a substance to be addicted to in order to hurt your kids. All you have to do is be emotionally absent. So this issue of parental guilt and caregiver guilt, I mean, I deal with it. Because my kids got issues. As adults, they have issues. And those issues I know would not be there had I been a different parent. That's just the reality. That's how it is. But if I look at it objectively, did I choose to be that way, or is there something driving me that I wasn't aware of? Maybe I had some pain that I was trying to drown through my work. Maybe I felt not wanted in this world because of stuff that happened to me early in life, and then my way of compensating was to make myself a really busy doctor. So people would then want my services. They didn't want me, at least they want my services. So I did that. But as a result, my kids didn't get the attention they needed. Guilt. Was I guilty of anything? No, I did my best given who I was, but that's who I was. That's the first point. The second point is that, well, the second point is simply that people do their best. And we're human beings. And so, you know, we have all this love and compassion in our hearts, but sometimes we don't project that. Sometimes we project impatience or frustration or anger or even rejection. We don't mean to. That's not our intention. It's just how we're wired. Not that we're born that way, but that's how we became wired. So until we overcome our wiring, until we overcome our childhood programming, we're still going to make mistakes, and we're still going to do stuff that's going to even hurt the people that we're actually trying to help. You might as well accept that. That's how it is. It's not your personal problem. It's not your fault. It's not individual to you. It's not personal to you. That's just who we are as human beings. So if you're going to feel guilt, well, just realize that you're a human being. And that's where all this comes from. And the fact is that whoever is asking this question, I have no doubt that you're doing your best at any given moment. But your best is limited by who you are, by your own programming and all the stuff that's happened to you, and by the stresses that you're under right now. So cut yourself some slack here. And furthermore, there's a worse thing about guilt, which is that when we look at our kids and we feel guilty, we're actually not seeing their possibilities, we're only seeing their problems. And for parents, that's very tempting. When I look at my kids, I see their problems. Other people look at them, what wonderful kids you got, you know? What are you talking about? But as parents and caregivers, we tend to see the problems because it's our job to deal with them, and also we tend to see our responsibility. We don't see the possibility. So, and there's a final thing I'd say about guilt, which is that whoever feels guilty today, as a caregiver, that guilt is not you. You felt guilty before your child ever came into the world. The guilt is just yours. And most of the time we feel guilty is because, as children, we learn to feel guilty because we failed at the most important thing that we took on, which is impossible. And we feel guilty because our parents were not happy. And the child can only take that personally. So if my parents are not happy, the kid can only say, well, something's wrong with me, so it's my fault. So your guilt in the present has got nothing to do with your child, it has to do with your parents. And you know what? You never could make them happy because it wasn't your job. Only they could make themselves happy, and if they couldn't do that, you couldn't do it for them. But as a result, you develop this guilt of failure, and you're responsible. And now you're projecting that guilt onto your child, of course, or your relationship with your child. So, for all these reasons, notice the guilt, just say hello to it, but don't pay attention to it. This is not a particularly smart thing, guilt. Okay? Okay, next question.
Hi. I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
Start with the first one.
Yeah.
When you compare, like, for example, 2 siblings that were raised by the same parents, and it was pretty fair. The parents were fair with both of them.
Yeah.
How would you explain one suffering with addictions and
Right.
pain and trauma, and the other one doing absolutely fine?
Sure. It's because your question is a good one and a very common one. It's an important one. It also contains a fallacy. You said when you look at 2 kids who were raised by the same parents, there's no 2 kids who were ever raised by the same 2 parents. Okay? No 2 children ever the same 2 parents. Now, let me give you an example for my family, which I talk about in my book, Scattered Minds. Okay, just to give you an illustration of it. So I was born in Budapest, Hungary, 1944. Jewish parents, Second World War, Nazi occupation. Can you imagine what first year I had? Can you imagine the stresses my mother was under? Her parents were killed in Auschwitz. My father, her husband, my father, was away in forced labor. She didn't know if he was dead or alive. That was my first year. My next brother was born in 1946. My father had come back. It was peacetime. It was a time of optimism, rebuilding. My third brother, or the third of us brothers, was born. His name is not Mate, his name is Mate. Because he was born in Canada. None of this European stuff. George Mate, who's now 50. He was born in 58, so how would that make sense? 54 years old this year. He's got a tattoo on his shoulder, which he put on just this year as a 53-year-old, and it's got the Vancouver Canucks logo. And I said, George, tell me this is just a paint-on job. He said, no, it's real. He says, and when we win the cup, it's going on. The cup is going on the other arm. But we're still waiting for that tattoo. But he was born in 58 in Canada to a mother who was then 39, a father who was 48, new immigrants in Canada, not speaking the language, trying to make their life in a new culture, struggling economically. Do you think that 3 brothers had the same parents? Can you see that they didn't? It's the same with all other kids, okay? So children are never born to the same parents because the parents are at a different stage of their relationship, a different stage of their life, different stresses. And not only that, each kid evokes something different from the parents. So even though I love my kids the same, and I might be fair in terms of what kind of goods I give them or what kind of rules I set down for them and all that, but emotionally I react to them differently because they trigger a different part of me because they're different people. So they don't experience me as the same at all. And furthermore, even if I could be the same person to them, which I can't be, even if I could be the same person, which I can't be, they would experience me differently because they have different sensibilities. They experience the world differently. The same piece of food doesn't taste the same to them. They're different people. The same father, even if he could be the same father, which he can't be, but even if he could be, he'd be experienced by them as somewhat different. And it doesn't matter what I am. What matters is their experience of me. So
Alright, that glaze was way too opaque and thick, so I just redid the entire background. And now I'll redo it again after that sets with a lighter glaze and increase the glow, which is all that I had intended to do just now. But it just, well, that's okay, because I like the way it reworked, and the undertones still show through a little bit. Also, it developed a very nice texture. But, oops. Oh well. Happy accidents. Thanks for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting with the Mushroom Match in Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting digital allegory. Have a good day.